All right, testing, testing, testing. One, two, three. This is the second recording because I was recording the first time, and the sun was creeping around the building, and I could tell that it was going just directly into the camera. So we're kind of racing against the camera here. Why am I out here? We're in beautiful downtown San Bernardino, and just a little bit of trivia. Not that you care, but I'm the one teaching, so I can tell you this. Behind me, off to my left, which would be your right, are the remains, the rubble piles from what used to be the Central City Mall. Later on, it was called the Carousel Mall. And obviously, it's been knocked down now, condemned and knocked down. But I spent so much of my childhood at that mall, and so it's kind of crazy to be here and to see it all knocked down. That is, in that mall, when I was a little boy, is where I got from what I can remember, my first pair of cowboy boots. My parents took me in there. There was a Western store in there. Went in there and bought some cowboy boots. So exciting. But spent so much of my growing up years there, my teen years, of course, teens at the mall, and got in a little bit of trouble at that mall too. But it's just so much of my childhood there. So it's so strange to see it knocked down. But there it is. And there actually was a music video filmed there while it was already closed. So, a little bit of, celebrity going on there. Not really. But anyways, and then off to my right, I can't show you right now, obviously, but we've got a bus stop over here, some more beautiful graffiti, and maybe one of these other lessons or studies. I'll show you that stuff. But we are in Leviticus 24. This is the second study in the Lost Leviticus tapes. That's what I called it. If you saw our previously recorded study on Leviticus, the Lost Leviticus studies, because we had recorded these back in 2021 when we were originally going through Leviticus, and then they got lost. I think I lost them. I can't blame Matt. I think it was me that recorded them during that time, and I think I lost them. So now that Matt is loading all of these old studies onto the podcasts, he's come up to Leviticus, to these chapters, and he asked if I could re-record them. So here we are. We're going to be in Leviticus 24 today. And I broke it up into two. I've got two main divisions. Verses 1 to 9, I titled Provisions for the Tabernacle. And then in verse 10, down to the bottom, I titled it Penalties. So provisions for the tabernacle, and then penalties. And that's because we all know that alliterations are so sweet. Right? Let's get into the first section, which is provisions for the tabernacle. And these really are two different sections here in the same chapter, but that's not a problem. We can handle it. Now, provisions for the tabernacle. So verses 1 to 4, first subpoints, if you're a note taker, I titled verses 1 to 4, lamps. This is care for the lamps. Verse 1 says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel that they bring to you pure oil of pressed olives for the light. That's oil to put in the lamps to burn. Now, I told you at the end of our last recording, I've been saying it all through Leviticus, and that is that we have to worship God the way that He describes and prescribes for us. It's not up to us to decide how we worship God. He decides that. And so here He's being very specific. He's being very specific because the children of Israel, they need the guidelines, the rules, the regulations, the law. Now, keep in mind, I've said it again. This is something else I've said lots of times through Leviticus. Exodus is the story of God taking His people out of Egypt. Leviticus is the start of the story and the process of God removing Egypt from His people. So He takes them out of Egypt, but they were there for so long that Egypt is ingrained in them. And He needs for them to be new people, a new creation. So that's why we're getting all of these specifics. Okay? But it's got to be olive oil here. And then in verse 3, it says, Outside the veil of the testimony, in the tabernacle of meeting, Aaron shall be in charge of it from evening until morning before the Lord continually. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. Now, I don't know if you can hear that bus. Of course, it had to pull up right now and make lots of noise. This mic might be good enough and it's drowning it out. I don't know. But here's what's going on. the tabernacle was really, the inside of it was divided up into two areas. You had the first inside area where there was lots of these different items where the furniture was there. And then there was a veil or a curtain, and behind that was was called the Holy of Holies. And that was where the Ark of the Covenant was at. If you've ever seen Indiana Jones, I've brought that up before. The Ark of the Covenant was back there, the Ark of the Testimony it was called. So, what God is talking about is the lampstand that was outside of that veil, not in the Holy of Holies, but in that first main area. Okay? And so Aaron, being the chief priest or the high priest, is responsible for that lamp, making sure that it's burning continually, all of the time. There had to be light in there, right? Some great, I was going to say visions here, but great illustrations of things like, the light of God, constantly burning. God's light never goes out, So really neat similarities there. And then it says in verse 4, he shall be in charge of the lamps on the pure gold lampstand before the Lord continually. So there had to be a certain kind of oil given. The oil had to, or the lamps had to continuously burn 24/7, 365 days a year. Always had to be burning. Now, the next section in the provisions for the tabernacle, we move from the lamps and the oil to the bread. There was special bread that had to go in there. Let's look at that in verses 5 to 9, the bread. And you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with it. 2/10 of an ephah, that was a measurement, shall be in each cake. Okay, very specific. You shall set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row, on the pure gold table before the Lord. So there was also a pure gold table, and there had to be these 2 rows of 6 loaves of bread. That meant 12 loaves altogether, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, always there in the presence of the Lord, always there before God. Now, it goes on to say in verse 7, and you shall put pure frankincense. Frankincense is an incense that would be burned. It says here, you shall put pure frankincense on each row, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, an offering made by fire to the Lord. So they were actually to take this incense, this powder, and sprinkle it on the 2 rows, on the bread. It's pretty interesting. And then in verse 8, every Sabbath he shall set it in order before the Lord continually. So that's referring to Aaron, the priest. So every Sabbath, every Saturday, Friday night into Saturday, and we can argue about when it really began and all that, whatever. The end of every week, basically, they were to. Says here in verse 8 that every Sabbath he shall set it in order before the Lord continually, being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. So that meant that the bread had to be changed out weekly. Okay, every week. Couldn't just leave it in there to get moldy, for 3 months or whatever. It had to be changed out every week. Verse 9, and it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in a holy place, for it is most holy to him, from the offerings of the Lord made by fire, by a perpetual statute. So interesting that bread had to be changed out every week. What do they do with it? They throw it away? No. In fact, Aaron and his sons were allowed to eat that bread. And in fact, here it says that they shall eat it in a holy place. It sounds like that was required. They had to do that. For it is most holy to him. So it was a holy bread. Now, what made it holy? It's a great question, I think. What made it holy? Was it the fact that they sprinkled the frankincense on it? Was it because the priest handled it? It was because God decided and declared it holy. It wasn't holy because Aaron decided it. It wasn't holy because the sons decided it. It wasn't holy because Moses decided. None of them decided that. It was holy because God said it was holy. That's a wonderful lesson there, and I don't want to take too much time, but let me mention it. What God declares holy, that's what's holy. We do not declare ourselves holy. God declares us holy. And in the New Testament, we learn that by believing in Jesus, placing our faith in Jesus, that we receive righteousness, that we are declared righteous. Now, we may not necessarily be righteous practically. God is sanctifying us and making us righteous, but there is a sense in which we're righteous because God declares us righteous. We're like that bread, really. There's nothing really special about it or holy in and of itself, but God declares it holy, thus it's holy. Can't argue with God, right? And so he tells them here, you're going to eat that bread. It's holy, and it's and it was as it says here, it is most holy to him from the offerings of the Lord made by fire, by a perpetual statute. Perpetual meaning that it goes on and on and on and on, doesn't end. Okay. Now, we've seen the provisions for the tabernacle. Let's move on to our second main division, which is the penalties. Penalties. What is this all about? Well, every society has to have rules, regulations, laws, and penalties for people who violate those rules or those laws or those regulations. You can't set up laws and then just allow everybody to break them. You've got to have some penalties. And that's the only way that society is going to function. That's the only way that your house is going to function. If there are no rules, I mean, that might sound great to us in one sense, like, oh, no rules, I can do whatever I want. But that means that everybody gets to do what they want. And if everybody gets to do what they want, you have lawlessness, chaos, anarchy. You've got to have some rules, right? If we're driving, I've used this lots of times, if we're driving out on the street and there are no laws, that means I can drive on whatever street I want, the side of the street I want. Well, if you're in the car with your parents, maybe I want to drive on their side of the street. And so I, going to go, head on collision because I want them to do what I want. You've got to have rules. You've got to have regulations. You've got to have penalties. And, we live in California. We know what it looks like to have a lack of penalties or, a lawless society. We've got people stealing things all the time and harming one another because we've got a state that's soft on crime. So we see what happens when there is a lack of penalties. So God introduces penalties. Let's look at it from verse 10 all the way down to the bottom. But the first section in verses 10 to 16 deals with penalties for blaspheming the Lord, speaking against the Lord. Let's find out what happens. Verse 10, now the son of an Israelite woman, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among the children of Israel. And this Israelite woman's son and a man of Israel fought each other in the camp. The children of God were not perfect people, far from it. And here's a fight in the middle of camp. And the Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed in the Bible, right? I can imagine that he must have, it doesn't tell us specifically why, but he must have just been so angry that in the process he cursed God. I only think that because there have been times in my life in the past where I got angry before I was saved. I get angry. Well, I've gotten angry since I was saved. That's not what I'm saying. But before being saved and being angry, there were times when I would curse God's name, when I would take his name in vain or just curse and blaspheme him this way, just because I was angry. And I could have been angry at my dog or my car because it broke down, or my boss. Could have been any dumb reason. They were not good reasons, but I would get angry. And so I'm assuming that he got in a fight with this guy and decided that he was going to curse God because of it, because he was angry. So what happens here? It says in verse 11, the Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed. And so they brought him to Moses. His mother's name was Shelomith, the daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan. Some of you know that's my favorite name for the tribes, Dan. Then they put him in custody, that the mind of the Lord might be shown to them. So they said, hey, we're going to wait. Let's put him in custody. Let's lock him up. And let's wait and let's seek the Lord and find out what God wants us to do. I can see that my camera's kind of moving around there. It's a little bit breezy here. So in verse 13, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take outside the camp him who has cursed. Then let all who heard him lay their hands on his head, and let all the congregation stone him. Then you shall speak to the children of Israel, saying, whoever curses his God shall bear his sin. And whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall certainly stone him, the stranger as well as him who is born in the land. When he blasphemes the name of the Lord, he shall be put to death. So death penalty for blaspheming the Lord. Seems harsh. Seems to us like, man, why is God being so angry? He's setting up. He's setting the example. These are brand new laws. These are people who need obviously they need some regulation in their life, and God wants them to experience freedom, but they can't experience freedom and harm one another, violate one another, violate God. They can't do that. So he's giving them some rules, some regulations. It's starting to get breezy in this little breezeway here, and I'm really hoping that this is not picking up all the wind because I'm almost done with my study. And that would be a really big bummer if I had to start all over again. But if I have to, we will. We'll see what happens. So it says in now beginning in verse 17. So we had penalties for blaspheming the Lord. Now in verses 17 to really verse 20. It goes on down to verse 22, you have various offenses. So penalties for various offenses. We're going to get back to this guy, what happened, but look at verse 17. Whoever kills any man shall surely be put to death. Death penalty, corporal punishment, capital punishment. That was established by God. Verse 18, whoever kills an animal shall make it good. Animal for animal. So if you kill an animal, you don't get killed for that, but you do have to replace the animal, same type of animal, same quality of animal that you killed. If a man, verse 19, if a man causes disfigurement of his neighbor, as he has done, so shall it be done to him. So if he harms his neighbor in some way, then harm is going to come to him in the same way as what God is saying. And then he says here in verse 20, fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. That sounds familiar. As he has caused disfigurement of a man, so it shall be done to him. Now, you have probably heard that because in Matthew chapter 5, here's what Jesus said. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Now, there's a couple of things going on. When God is speaking to Moses in the book of Leviticus that we're studying, that has to do with laws and rules and regulations for society, in order for society to function properly. When Jesus brings that up, he's not denying, he's not going against what God was establishing. He's talking about on a personal level. He says if somebody violates you, as a Christian, don't retaliate and seek to go after them and want to take vengeance on them. He says, hey, respond to them in love. Because what Jesus was doing is he was saying, hey, we're the kingdom of God, and we respond differently. And again, what God had first established had to do with the whole society. But what God is giving to Moses is these are, again, laws for society for it to function properly. If somebody wanted to be forgiving, obviously that's a wonderful thing. But there had to be rules and laws and regulations. So hopefully you understand that Jesus wasn't going against what God the Father was establishing. He was talking about on a personal level. Okay? It goes on to say in verse 21, And whoever kills an animal shall restore it, but whoever kills a man shall be put to death. Now he simply repeats what he's already told them, but he's making it clear that animals and humans are not on the same level. That if somebody kills an animal, they need to replace that animal. But if they kill a man, they're going to lose their life. Understand? So God establishing animals were important. God liked animals. You see that throughout the scriptures. But what he was establishing there, making it clear that man and animals are not on the same level. I like dogs. I like birds. I like fish. I even like cats. I like animals. But I need to make sure that I understand that animals and people are not on the same level. People are far more important than animals. And many of us love our pets. Society, we really have gotten to a place where many people are obsessed with their pets. And listen, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again right now. I understand. I understand that people are hard to get along with and oftentimes so hateful and hurtful. And you can have a pet who seemingly loves you unconditionally, right? They're just always happy to see you. We can get into a big argument, we can end up hating one another over this. I believe that animals are operating off of instinct. They don't fully understand, love or unconditional love or compassion and all of those things. They're working off of instinct. But they do seemingly love us unconditionally. And so it can be really easy to forsake people and to really focus on animals, our pets, and to the detriment of people. Understand that people are far more important than animals as far as God is concerned. And our first responsibility is to people, to love people and to love them unconditionally. And he's getting that point across here in these verses, which is incredible because he's talking about laws and he's talking about the death penalty, and yet still we see the compassion and the mercy of God, but also we see what God considers important and what God considers a little less important. So keep that in mind, you and I. Now, he goes on to say in verse 22, you shall have the same law for the stranger and for one from your own country. So same law applies to everybody. And then he says this in verse 22, for I am the Lord your God. I am the Lord your God. So he's making it clear, I'm establishing this. This isn't some Egyptian king doing this. This isn't one of the Canaanites. This isn't Moses establishing this. It isn't anyone else. It's not some other king, some other so-called God. He puts his stamp of approval on it, for I am the Lord your God. You are my people. I'm your God. We belong to one another. This is my rule. Follow it, is what he's saying. Okay? And that's wonderful to know that we belong to God and that he's got a specific way of us operating and doing things. Now, we've got one more verse. It's a hard one, but it's reality. It's we get back to the guy that blasphemed God. Look what happens in verse 23. Then Moses spoke to the children of Israel, and they took outside the camp him who had curse, and stoned him with stones. So the children of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses. Seems harsh. But understand that there had to be rules and laws. That's how a society is going to function. That's really how any body of people is going to function, whether it be employees or students. In a class, there has to be law and order. There's got to be. Can there be compassion and mercy? Yes, absolutely. But there's got to be some guidelines, or else people just do whatever they want, and again, there's chaos. So we see the goodness of God here in these verses. Yes, in that last half that was a harsh story, hard to swallow for some of us. But an example had to be laid out, and it was clear, and it was from God. So we know that it was just, that it was right, that it was righteous, that it was good, and we want that from God. All right? So I look forward to seeing you in the next study. Again, this was 24. We've got, I think, the second part of chapter 25, but I think I'm going to re-record all of chapter 25, and that'll just be a little bit nicer instead of cutting it into two. There's a reason why it was half. It doesn't really matter. I'll just re-record the whole thing. So God bless you guys, and I hope you're enjoying Leviticus. And thank you so much for watching on YouTube and on the podcasts and all of that. Just really, really appreciate you guys. So God bless you guys.